You Know What You Should Do by Jessica Lee Morgan. Women in music. Women have always had a tougher time in music than men. Am I biased? Probably. I've got some stats here in the book which you can read for yourself, but I'm going to skip over them now. They basically say that women have a tougher time in music. So, now to my gut instinct. I met a lot of women when I was a visitor for the PRS Members Fund. Some were successor members, widows of composers. Some were writers who had contributed to some significant hits. Their hubbies had taken the credit. There are, of course, many successful female songwriters and composers, but their journey seems to have been harder. They've had to overcome prejudice and oppression. To be a songwriter, you have to be a business person too, and often women get squashed in discussions. They're made to feel insignificant. At the fund, one of our board members was Lindsay DePaul. She sadly passed away suddenly in 2014. She was a fearsome board member, fighting for the underdog and insistent that things were done right. When she died, the fund was keen to commemorate her, and with the PRS Foundation, we founded the Lindsay DePaul Prize. Unsurprisingly, the male chairman, with his outmoded views, thought it was nonsense that we were singling out women for special attention. He argued that we may as well be more specific, one-legged Chinese lesbians or something. This is the same guy who commented that I had better legs than my predecessor. He's dead now. I nearly had a nervous breakdown organising the inaugural dinner because I was doing the work of 3 people. But we did it and gave the first prize to a young girl of 15 named Emma McGrath. The prize was money and mentoring from an elderly male publisher. I like this chap, but I wish we could have come up with someone more appropriate. On the other hand, he represents the industry that she was entering. This was before trans and non-binary people were included in such funding. Their issues of marginalisation are, of course, as important and deserving of help, but they are different. I can't help feeling, and feel free to argue with me, that some artists have made more of a marketing point about their gender fluidity than their actual talent. However, don't women have to contend with overt sexism and ageism? It's complicated, and I can only speak about my own experience and how I feel in my gut. It was important to commemorate Lindsay's rise to the top. In an era where women were overly sexualised and then stamped on by any means necessary, she fought her way through and then held her own. She opened up about the mental and physical abuse she suffered and even made a self-defence video. Now the press is rife with stories about the abuse of women in the music industry. Shocking stories of coercion and sexual violence are coming out as women feel brave enough to tell their stories. It's important to recognise them all, as previously it was taken for granted that that's just the way it was, that women could be bedded and manipulated. The female voice, and not just the singing voice, is different in music. I think we write differently. Expressing our deepest experiences and emotions through music gives us some protection. We can say things and then dismiss them as artistic license, or choose to tell the story behind them. Take someone like Joni Mitchell, who writes narratives about specific experiences. People always wonder who they relate to, and sometimes she has explained herself. Carly Simon's You're So Vain has sparked speculation over the years on the subject of the song. The whole Laurel Canyon canon has had people wondering about who slept with whom, and who wrote about whom. Women's sexual relationships are far more the focus of attention. We assume that if there's a woman in a band, then she's with one of the guys. It's often true. If a woman is linked with a man in the industry, it's assumed they're sleeping together. Certainly for me, touring with Chris makes the logistics easier. It's why Linda McCartney joined Wings. I was once asked, just as I finished a set, if my mum had slept with Paul McCartney. She never did, for the record, but many people assume she did. The music that women make is viewed differently from the music that men make. I put up a request for songs on social media when we were putting together one of our radio shows. Men suggested songs and singers, but they were all maudlin folk style. Women suggested their own songs at first, and then started suggesting strong female songs. There was a big difference between the male versus female gaze. Some festivals like Glastonbury are keen to redress the balance by having a 50% lineup of acts. So what makes a female band? Is it that there's a female singer? Or one other member? Or a whole band of women? Image-wise, it seems that women have to try a lot harder. We're judged on our appearance far more strongly than men. While handsome men are of course signed up by the record labels, women have a much shorter shelf life. If they hit success while they're young and sexy, then they might be allowed to age. But even then, every line and wrinkle and grey hair is criticised. If not, an older woman has almost no chance of breaking through. Susan Boyle might be one exception, but even she was labelled a curiosity. They still insisted on polishing her up. When I was singing in covers bands at weddings and working men's clubs, there are no working women's clubs, I was often asked, "Are you the stripper on my way in?" I wasn't allowed to heft the gear. I was told that I was rubbish because I was the female lead singer in a Queen covers band. Now there seem to be many more female singers in the charts, and there are very few that I like. I don't like the ultra-processing for starters. All recordings are processed in some way. You need compression and EQ and other effects to make it cut through. A modern pop singer such as Dua Lipa might have 10 vocal processing effects on her voice. It makes it stand out in the radio and smack you between the ears. This is why Tony got into trouble with Adele. He said, even Adele, meaning she's a good singer, has some kind of vocal processing on her voice. We can all hear it. She leaped to conclusions and said, on stage, this guy says I can't fucking sing. He was demonised. He didn't mean she can't sing. He meant that she, like anyone else, has vocal processing effects applied. It's a shame she took offence because Tony and I are both Alexander technique teachers and she has a huge problem with her lower lumbar vertebrae. Anyway, apart from vocal processing, there are very few women who have good, powerful voices that make it into the charts. The trend is for girly, groany, flippy voices who, if they do let rip, do it in a very high belt with the aforementioned massive processing. Even Kylie's latest sounds absolutely horrible, almost robotic, and she's another good singer. That's not to say that there aren't great female singers. I love female resonant voices that use their range to the fullest, low and high. Katie Lang, Nina Simone, Tracy Chapman, Dusty Springfield. I worked with Sarah J. Morris once. We had both sung on the Decades album for David Palfreyman and Nicholas Pegg, and eventually did a live recorded performance for Vintage TV. She came to rehearsal and asked, "Where shall I stand for the yelling?" She's phenomenal and very lovely too. It's important to recognise women in music because our biology defines us. We have to deal with hormones, periods, childbearing, motherhood, actual or socially expected. There's ageing, wrinkles, breast, figure, weight, hair, and the menopause. They're a unique set of circumstances, not the same as gender fluid and transgender, and not the same as men. Often we're promoted as sexual beings first and musicians second, and our music reflects this. For so long, women have sung songs written by men. They sing about love, wanting to be loved, wanting to be wanted, wanting men, flirting, wanting sex, and then after all that, being enraged at being disrespected, cheated, abandoned, hurt. I've written about all of it. Consent in music. After commenting on a Facebook post by Robert Fripp, where there was a debate about unauthorised photographs and recordings of concerts, he shared my comments on his personal and his fan page. He added a comment about how women understood the use of no more than men. How do performers consent to being consumed? The person who started it all stated that he was doing performers a favour by surreptitiously recording them so that in their dotage they could look back at their performances. I said that if performers wanted their performances recorded, they would arrange it. Then followed a comment about the sale by the artist of previously unauthorised recordings, turning a disadvantage into an advantage. Someone took exception to Robert's comment about women, saying it wasn't about gender. Many people disagreed. I realised that it's more about gender than I had thought. On occasion, my gigs have been recorded without my permission. Whether someone in the audience wants to add to their private collection, or a sound engineer wants to test his mix, it's not usually an issue. The sound engineers have offered me the recordings afterwards, if they hadn't alerted me beforehand. However, I prefer to know in advance whether it's been recorded. While I'd always performed to the best of my abilities, I might do it a little differently if I thought it was being preserved for posterity. Once I was invited to play a gig. The host, who also engineered the show, had dinner with us, and we had ample time to talk. He asked why I wasn't more famous. He had the chance to ask my permission to record the gig, but he didn't and went ahead regardless. The next day he sent me the WAV files, asking which songs I wanted him to work on. When I asked what he did with the recordings, he said he gives them to the artist, but might put them on the internet at a later date. We should really have discussed all this prior to the show taking place, and preferably put something in writing about who had control of these recordings. When we were releasing the archive albums, Mary reluctantly agreed to give some press interviews. One guy came and used his tape recorder as an aide-memoire, interviewing Mary at Space Studios in Cardiff. Years later, the audio appeared on his website. I asked him to take it down, and he complained about it. But the fact is, you give a different interview if you know it's going to be released as an audio recording. Mary had given the interview on the understanding that it was for print only, with her approval of the text. The bootleg industry is a thriving one. So many concerts have been recorded by people in the audience or the guy behind the sound desk. This is how the Festival Hall album came about. We have no idea who made the recording, but on this occasion we're very glad they did. It's only a stereo feed from the sound desk, but it's the most complete recording of Mary playing live. More bootlegs have surfaced since, and Japanese companies are making CDs without Mary's consent, selling them over the internet. They have compiled recordings of concerts, TV appearances, vinyl singles, even acetates, the early pressings of records made as tests. Some of our catalogue has appeared on these. Even Those Were the Days and Goodbye, re-recorded by Mary and Tony after she left Apple Records, have been distributed beyond the terms of the original contract, without renegotiating new terms and leaving Mary unpaid. The most effective way of taking control of this situation is to release them ourselves, and we've done this with a few recordings so far. If anyone claims to have an interest, they are welcome to show us their contract with Mary. Here are two other examples of non-consent. Donna Summer recorded Love to Love You Baby, but apparently she was not comfortable with the salacious nature and intended it for another singer. Sia wrote and demoed Titanium with David Guetta and did not intend for her vocal to be the final one. Of course, those are the versions we know and love. To some extent, we have to let it all slide. Artists bootleg their own material because they feel let down by their labels. Sessions recorded for friends decades ago end up being released, but we're not about to set the lawyers on them. If the release isn't selling millions, chasing money isn't likely to amount to more than a round of drinks in the pub. At the end of the day, we all just want to make music.